The first body had no name. That was what troubled Cole Maddox the most. Not the torn flesh, not the way the earth around it had been gouged deep as if by something enormous. Not even the silence that had swallowed the prairie dog and cicada sounds for a quarter mile in every direction. What troubled him was that nobody in Duskfall came forward to claim the man. A town of 300 souls, and not one of them recognized the boots, the belt buckle, the hat crushed flat beside the remains. The dead man was a stranger, and that meant the thing that killed him wasn't hunting people it knew. It was hunting at random. Cole stood over the body in the pale gray light of early morning, his broad hat casting a shadow across the ruin of what had once been a human being. He was a tall man, lean through the shoulders and hips the way men get when they spend more years on horseback than on solid ground. His jaw carried 3 days of gray-brown stubble, and his eyes dark as creek water under storm clouds moved across the scene with the slow, methodical calm of a man who had seen violent death enough times that it no longer surprised him, though it never entirely stopped bothering him either. He wore a long canvas duster, the color of dried mud, and beneath it a weathered leather vest over a dark shirt. His gun belt sat low on his right hip, the holster holding a Colt single-action army that had been re-gripped twice and fired more times than he cared to count. Sheriff Dale Pruitt stood behind him, hat in hand, turning it in nervous circles. Pruitt was a younger man, soft around the middle in the way of men who became lawmen in quiet towns and stayed that way until the quiet ended. This morning, the quiet had ended. "Third one this month," Pruitt said. His voice was tight. "First two I figured for a mountain cat, maybe. Big one. But this..." He stopped, swallowed. "Ain't no cat done this, Cole." "No," Cole agreed. He crouched lower, studying the ground. The tracks were what troubled him second most after the nameless dead. They began 20 yards north of the body and ended 15 yards south of it, as if whatever made them had descended from the air and then returned to it. The prints themselves were deep. The creature that made them was heavy, heavier than anything Cole had encountered in 30 years of tracking, and they showed something like a hand, splayed wide, with long, curving impressions where claws had bitten into the hardpan earth. "This is something else. People are scared," Pruitt said. "Families are talking about leaving. The Hendersons already packed their wagon 2 days ago. I got 3 ranchers who won't let their hands work after sundown, which means their cattle ain't getting fed right, which means..." "I'll find it," Cole said. He stood, dusted off the knees of his trousers, and looked north toward the dark line of scrub cedar and dry creek bed that marked the edge of the Duskfall grazing lands. The sun was just cresting the low ridge to the east, painting everything amber and rust. Somewhere behind him, back in town, his daughter Emma was still asleep. She'd been sleeping late every morning this week, which wasn't like her. She'd always been an early riser, up before him, coffee already made when he came downstairs. He filed that thought away without examining it and turned back to Pruitt. "What's the bounty?" he asked. "If you're enjoying this story, do us a favor and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep bringing you tales from the Old West like this one." Now, back to Cole Maddox and the darkness settling over Duskfall. Cole Maddox had come to Duskfall 8 months ago with Emma and 2 horses and not much else. He'd spent the previous 15 years working as a bounty hunter across the territories, New Mexico, Arizona, the Texas Panhandle, up through Kansas and into Colorado, when a good contract took him there. He was good at the work. Some men were good at carpentry or blacksmithing or growing wheat. Cole was good at finding people who didn't want to be found and returning them to those who were paying to find them. He had no particular pride in it. It was a skill, the way tracking was a skill, the way reading weather was a skill. He used it because it was what he had. Emma had spent most of her childhood moving with him, town to town, boarding house to boarding house. She was 18 now, dark-haired and serious-faced, with her mother's eyes gray-green and deep and her father's stubborn jaw. She'd learned to ride before she could read, had learned to read from whatever books Cole could find in whatever towns they passed through, and had grown into a young woman of quiet intelligence and fierce self-sufficiency. She could cook a camp meal over an open fire, and she could pull a splinter from a horse's frog without flinching, and she could sit for hours in perfect silence watching the desert, which was something Cole had never been able to do without his mind wandering. They'd come to Duskfall because Emma had asked to stop. Just stop, for a while, stay somewhere. She was 18 and she'd never lived anywhere long enough to know the names of her neighbors. Cole had looked at her across a campfire south of the Canadian River and seen something in her face that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite anger, but was something in between, something patient and old, and he had said yes. Duskfall was a reasonable enough town. It had a main street with a dry goods store, a livery, a small hotel, a saloon that doubled as a barber shop on Saturday mornings, a church that held services twice a month, and a population of people who worked hard and minded their own business, with the particular intensity of people who had come to the frontier specifically to be left alone. Emma had found work helping the town's only doctor, a thin elderly man named Hargrove, who was going blind in his left eye and needed assistance reading labels and keeping his supply cabinet organized. She seemed to like it. She seemed, for the first time in her life, to be settling. And then the killings started. The first body had appeared 5 weeks ago. A drifter found on the North Road, torn up badly enough that Pruitt had kept the details quiet to avoid starting a panic. The second was 3 weeks after that, a rancher's hand named Perez, who'd been working a night fence check and never come back. Perez's employer had found what remained of him at sunrise and had ridden into town shaking so badly he'd fallen off his horse twice between the ranch and the sheriff's office. Now this third body, nameless, on the South Grass. Cole spent the day tracking. He was thorough and methodical about it, the way he was thorough and methodical about everything, moving outward from the kill site in expanding circles, reading the ground the way other men read books. He found 2 more sets of the deep, strange prints, both leading toward the dry creek bed north of town, both ending abruptly, as if the creature had taken to the air or simply ceased to exist. He found a broken cedar branch 8 feet off the ground, snapped clean, which told him the thing was tall. He found a tuft of coarse dark hair caught on a rusted strand of barbed wire, which he put in his shirt pocket without knowing exactly why. By evening he was back in town, dusty and thirsty, with more questions than he'd started with. He found Emma in the kitchen of the small house they were renting from a widow named Mrs. Calloway. Emma was standing at the stove with her back to him, stirring something in a pot. She was wearing a plain blue dress, and her dark hair was loose down her back. She didn't turn when he came in. "You were out at the South Grass," she said. It wasn't a question. "Third body," he said, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. She stirred the pot. "Did you find anything?" "Tracks. Nothing that makes much sense yet." He sat down at the table and pulled off his boots. "How was Hargrove today?" "Fine. Tired. He's been having headaches." She ladled soup into 2 bowls and brought them to the table, finally looking at him. Her face was composed, calm, the way it usually was. She sat across from him and picked up her spoon. "Are you taking the contract?" "Already took it." She nodded slowly, looking down at her bowl. "Of course you did." "Emma." "I'm not arguing," she said, in the tone that meant she was slightly arguing. "I just thought we were staying here. We are staying here. This is me staying here and also dealing with whatever's killing people." She didn't say anything else about it. They ate in the careful quiet that had existed between them since her mother died 6 years ago, not an unfriendly quiet, just a quiet that held things in it, unsaid things, the accumulated weight of a life lived on the move, and all the conversations they'd never quite had about it. After supper, Cole sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the stars come out over the dark prairie. Emma washed the dishes and then came out and sat beside him for a while, and they didn't talk, and it was all right. Around 9 o'clock, she said goodnight and went inside. Cole sat a while longer. The prairie was quiet. The night insects had gone silent, which they did sometimes for no reason, and the silence felt large and attentive, like something listening. He went to bed around 10. He woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of the back door clicking shut. He lay still for a moment, listening. The house was quiet. He got up without lighting the lamp and moved to the hallway, then to Emma's door. He put his hand against it and pushed it open an inch. Her bed was empty. Cole dressed quickly, quietly, the way a man dresses who has spent 30 years in situations where speed and silence were the same thing. He buckled on his gun belt, pulled on his boots, took his hat and his duster and went out the back door. The night was cool, the moon 3/4 full and casting hard, pale shadows across the yard and the alley beyond. He found Emma's tracks in the alley dust without difficulty. He'd been reading her footprints since she was 2 years old and could have identified them in a crowd. They led north, through the alley, behind the livery, out along the fence line toward the dry creek bed. He followed at a distance, staying in the shadows, using the scrub cedar and the low rises of ground, the way he'd use cover in any tracking situation. He told himself he wasn't worried. He told himself she'd probably just woken up restless and gone for a walk, which she did sometimes. He told himself there was a reasonable explanation. He'd been telling himself things like that for 3 weeks. Since the first morning he'd noticed the mud on her boots when he came down to breakfast. Dried red-brown creek bed mud when she hadn't been near the creek, and she'd looked at him and said she'd been down to water the horses early, and he'd accepted it because what else do you do? What else do you do when the alternative is something you can't think about yet? He followed her a quarter-mile north of town, through the dry creek crossing, up the far bank and into the flat ground beyond where the scrub gave way to open country under the wide sky. The moon was bright enough to see clearly. He came over a low rise and stopped. Emma was standing in the open 50 yards ahead of him. She was standing very still, with her arms at her sides and her head tilted back, looking up at the sky. Her dark hair hung loose. She was still in her nightdress, her feet bare on the cold ground. Cole watched her, the way a man watches something he doesn't yet understand, with his whole body quiet and his mind sorting and discarding explanations. Then she began to change. He had no word for it. He would have no word for it for a long time after. What he saw was not something that had a name in his experience. In the experience of any man he'd ever known or any story he'd ever heard around a campfire in the territories. He saw his daughter's silhouette against the moonlit sky begin to shift, begin to grow, the familiar lines of her becoming something else, something larger, the nightdress falling away in pieces as the form beneath it expanded and altered, the shoulders broadening impossibly, the back arching, the legs changing their proportion and their angle, until what stood in the open ground was not Emma Maddox. What stood there was enormous. 8 feet, 9 feet, more a figure that was vaguely human in its basic shape but stretched and altered, the limbs too long, the hands become those terrible splayed claws he'd been studying in the hardpan earth for 3 days. The head was wrong, the face stretched long and angular, with deep-set eyes that caught the moonlight, and threw it back the pale phosphorescent green of a predator's eyes in lamplight. Dark, coarse hair covered the whole of it, the same color as the tuft he'd found on the barbed wire, the same tuft that was sitting right now in his shirt pocket. The Wendigo, though he had no name for it yet, though that name would come later from the old Comanche man who lived in the arroyo west of town and who would explain it to Cole, with the patient sorrow of someone explaining a thing they'd known was coming. The Wendigo stood, in the moonlight, and turned its terrible head slowly, scenting the air. Cole was downwind, barely breathing, his hand on the grip of his Colt, but not drawing it, his mind a white and roaring blankness behind which something that was not thought and not instinct, but maybe love was pressing against the instinct to draw and fire and draw and fire. The creature moved north at a speed that made his stomach clench, covering ground in long loping strides that ate up the distance between the creek bank and the dark horizon in what seemed like only moments. Then it was gone, swallowed by the dark. Cole stood where he was for a long time. Then he sat down on the cold ground, which was not something he did. He sat on the ground with his hands hanging between his knees, and he looked at the place where his daughter had been standing, and he did not move for a very long time. When he got back to the house, Emma's bed was empty. He sat in the kitchen with the lamp turned low and waited. At an hour before dawn, he heard the back door open. Quiet, careful. He heard her footsteps in the hall slower than usual, heavier, like someone exhausted, and then the soft close of her bedroom door. He sat at the kitchen table until full daylight came through the window, and then he got up and made coffee. Emma came downstairs at 7, dressed and with her hair pinned up. She looked tired. There were shadows under her gray-green eyes, and her face was pale. She moved carefully, the way people move when their whole body aches, when every joint has been used beyond its purpose and is protesting. "Morning," she said, and poured herself coffee. "Morning," Cole said. She sat across from him and wrapped both hands around her cup. She didn't look at him directly. She looked at the table, at the window, at the wall. She was doing that thing she'd done since she was small, where she went quiet and inward when something was wrong and waited for him to either notice or not notice, depending on what she needed. He noticed. He always noticed. The question, today, and every day since 3 weeks ago when the mud appeared on her boots, was what he did about noticing. "You sleep all right?" he asked. "Fine," she said, a half second too quickly. He drank his coffee. Outside, Duskfall was waking up. He could hear the livery hand across the alley starting his morning, the distant sound of the blacksmith's hammer, a dog barking once and then stopping. "I'm going out to the West Arroyo today," Cole said. "Heard there's an old Comanche man lives out there. Thought he might know something about the tracks I've been finding. Emma went very still. Might be gone most of the day, Cole continued, watching her. Probably not back till supper. All right, she said. Her voice was even. Her hands around the cup were steady. She was her father's daughter in this. Whatever was happening inside her was invisible on the outside, locked down, controlled. He'd taught her that, and now he was discovering there were things you could teach a person that cut both ways. You going to be at Hargrove's? Till noon. Then I'll come back and start supper. He nodded, finished his coffee, put on his hat. He did go to the West Arroyo, but not to find an old Comanche man. He went to think, which required open country and distance from the town and from the house, and from Emma's careful face across the breakfast table. He rode his horse, a steady gray gelding named Walker, along the arroyo for 2 hours, and he thought. What he thought was this. He had a contract. 3 people were dead, more would die. He was the man Duskfall had hired to stop the thing that was killing them, and he was good at his job, and he had the means to do his job, and the professional side of him, the side that had been doing this for 30 years, could see with complete clarity exactly what needed to happen. What also existed was the other side of him, which was the side that had carried Emma out of a burning farmhouse when she was 4 years old, wrapped in a quilt that he held over her head as the roof came down, and the side that had sat up all night beside her cot when she had the fever at age 7, and the side that had watched her grow from a small, solemn child into a capable young woman who was trying, at 18, to finally have a home somewhere, and that side had its own clarity. The two clarities were looking directly at each other with no possibility of compromise. He turned Walker around at noon and rode to the west part of town, to the low house at the edge of the settlement where the Comanche man lived. His name, Cole had been told by the liveryman, was Ahanu, and he'd been living in Duskfall or near it for 20 years, and he was old, and his English was good, and people mostly left him alone, which was what he seemed to want. Ahanu was sitting in front of his house on an upturned feed crate, smoking a short pipe, and watching Cole approach with the expression of a man who has been expecting a visitor for some time. He was very old. Cole put him at 70, maybe more, with a deeply lined face and white hair pulled back and tied. His eyes were sharp and dark, and they moved over Cole with a thoroughness that Cole recognized as the same thing he did himself when he was reading a situation. "The bounty hunter," Ahanu said. He did not say it as a greeting. He said it as a category. "That's right." Cole dismounted and ground-tied Walker. "Mind if I ask you a few questions? About the killings?" "Yes." Ahanu smoked his pipe for a moment. A lizard crossed the ground between them and vanished under the wall of the house. "Sit down," the old man said. Cole sat on the ground. There was only the one feed crate, and took off his hat. The sun was past noon and the heat was heavy, the dry desert heat that pressed down from above and radiated up from the ground simultaneously, as if you were being cooked from both directions. "You know what it is," Cole said. "It wasn't a question. I know what it is," Ahanu said. He looked at his pipe. "The Wendigo. It is old. It is from the northern peoples, not my people, but we know the stories. A spirit of hunger and winter. It can take a person and change them." "Change them how?" Ahanu looked at him. The dark eyes held something, not pity, exactly. Something more complicated. Recognition, maybe. "At night," he said carefully, "when the spirit takes full hold, the person becomes the thing. They do not know it. They wake in the morning and they remember nothing." The ground felt very solid under Cole's hands. He kept his face still. "How does it start?" he asked. "How does a person get taken?" "Different ways in different stories. A bite sometimes. A meeting in the dark. A place where the spirit dwells and someone passes through without protection." He paused. "There is a canyon 3 days north of here. I have known for some time that something came through it south. I had hoped it would pass." He looked at Cole. It did not pass. "Is there a cure?" Ahanu was quiet. He smoked his pipe. The smoke drifted south on the dry air. "Tell me," Cole said. "There are things said." The old man chose his words with the deliberateness of someone who understood the weight of them. "The spirit can be driven out, but only if the person chooses. The person must know what they are, and must choose to refuse the spirit, to fight it, to force it out." He paused. "This is very hard. The spirit is strong. It does not want to leave. The fight to drive it out, it may kill the person it has taken." Cole sat with that for a moment. "Is there another way? To end the killings without that risk?" "Yes." Ahanu looked at him with those sharp, complicated eyes. You could kill the body that the spirit rides in, he said, very quietly. This would end it. The spirit would need to find a new host, but if you killed the body far enough from people, he spread his hands, the killings would stop. Yes, Cole said, they would. He put his hat back on. He stood. He thanked Ahanu and got back on Walker and rode back toward town at a slow walk, because there was no hurry. The thinking he'd been doing all morning had not gotten easier, but now at least it had a shape. He could see both doors plainly now. Behind the first door was a thing he'd done 100 times, in 100 variations, in 100 dark places across the territories. Behind the second door was something he'd never done in his life and had never imagined doing. He rode you home. Emma was in the kitchen when he got back, making biscuits. She looked up when he came in, then down again at her work, hands moving in the flour. Learn anything? She asked. Cole hung his hat and his duster and sat down at the table. He put both hands flat on the surface and looked at them for a moment. Then he looked up at her. Emma, he said, come sit down. She went still. Her hands stopped in the flour. She didn't turn around. Emma. She turned around. She looked at him across the kitchen with her gray-green eyes, and he saw now that he was looking for it, really looking the exhaustion behind them. Not the tiredness of a person who'd slept badly, the exhaustion of someone carrying something enormous and carrying it alone. She came to the table and sat across from him, the way she'd sat across from him 1,000 times, at 100 different tables, in 100 different towns. I followed you last night, he said. The color went out of her face. I saw what happens, he said. Out by the North Creek. Emma sat very still. She was doing the thing, the lockdown, controlled, invisible thing, but her hands on the table were shaking slightly. A fine tremor, and he could see it. I didn't know, she said very quietly. I didn't know it was me. I woke up this morning and Her voice caught. She stopped, steadied herself. I've been waking up tired. Sometimes there's dirt on my feet, I thought. She pressed her lips together. I thought something was happening, but I didn't want to. She stopped again. Her eyes were dry, which was like him. I didn't know it was me, Papa. It was the first time she'd called him that in 3 years. He wasn't sure she knew she'd done it. I know, he said. Those people, her voice dropped to almost nothing. Those people who died, was it? I don't know for certain, he said, which was a mercy and also possibly true. I don't know how long this has been happening. She nodded slowly. The tremor in her hands was worse now. There's a way to drive it out, he said. It's hard and it may. He stopped. Made himself say it. It might kill you. The fighting it might kill you. But it's there. Emma looked at him. And the other way? There isn't another way, Cole said. She watched his face. She'd been watching his face since she was a small child, reading it the way he read everything, the way she'd learned from him. He could see her reading it now. You're lying, she said very softly. He held her gaze. Papa, tell me the other way. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, a horse went past in the street at a walk, the slow, clopping rhythm of it marking the seconds. The other way ends the killings, he said. And it ends you too. Emma was quiet. She looked at her hands on the table. She looked at them for a long time with an expression Cole couldn't quite read, not fear, not grief exactly. Something older than both. The expression of someone doing arithmetic with numbers that don't come out even no matter how many times you run them. How many people? She said. If I keep going like this, how many? I don't know. But more. Yes. She nodded. She was still looking at her hands. I've been having dreams, she said. Not dreams exactly. More like I wake up and there's something at the edge of it. A feeling, something that wants. She paused. It's hungry. It's always hungry. And I feel it, even in the daytime, like something pulling at the back of my head. Cole didn't say anything. It's going to get worse, she said. It wasn't a question. The old man thinks so, yes. She nodded again. Then she folded her hands together on the table in that composed, decided way that was absolutely and completely her own. Not something she'd gotten from him or from her mother or from anyone, just something that was Emma, and she looked at him directly. Tell me what to do, she said. To fight it. Tell me exactly what the old man said. Cole went back to Ahanu the next morning. He came back with what the old man had told him. A fast of 1 full day, from sunrise to sunrise, no food and no water, sitting in open ground away from shelter. The body in its hunger would echo the spirit's hunger, would create a resonance, a kind of lever. and the person, if they were strong enough, if their will was strong enough, could use that resonance to reach the spirit and refuse it. To say no with the whole of themselves. It will feel like dying, Ahanu had told him, because it is a little. You are refusing a part of what you have become. That part fights back. Emma listened to all of this with her hands folded and her face composed. She asked 2 questions, practical questions, logistics questions, the questions of someone who intends to do a thing correctly, and then she said she wanted to do it tonight. Cole said she didn't have to do it tonight. She could take a few days. Emma said that every day she took meant one more night, and she wasn't willing to take that risk. He couldn't argue with that. He had taught her to think that way, to weigh things honestly and act on the weight. He couldn't now complain that she was doing it. He spent the day making quiet preparations. He told Pruitt he had a lead on the creature and was going to try something that night, and to keep people inside after dark. Pruitt asked no questions, which was one of the things Cole had come to respect about him. He went back to the house and sat with Emma while she ate a good meal in the afternoon, the last meal before the fast, and they talked about nothing in particular. About a horse fair they'd passed through once in New Mexico when she was 12, about the time Walker had gotten into the grain storage and eaten himself sick, about a dog they'd had briefly when she was 9 that had followed them from Abilene to Dodge City before vanishing somewhere outside of Wichita. They did not talk about what was coming. After supper, Emma went upstairs and changed into her riding clothes, practical and sturdy, and she came back down and stood in the kitchen doorway with her hat in her hands and looked at him. "You're going to be there?" she said. "The whole time," he said. "But not close." "No, not close," Ahanu said. "I know what he said." She put her hat on. "I just needed to know you'd be there." They rode north together in the fading light, past the dry creek, past the place where Cole had stood 2 nights ago and watched her change, out to a wide, flat stretch of open ground, a mile north of town, where the sky came all the way down to the earth, and there was nothing in any direction but the land and the dark coming on. Emma got down from her horse and handed Cole the reins. She walked out to the middle of the flat ground and stood there. She looked small out there, which surprised him. She'd stopped seeming small to him years ago, had grown into herself so completely that he'd stopped seeing the child in her, and now distance returned it, the way distance always simplifies things. She turned and looked at him. Even from 50 yards he could see her face clearly in the last light, that composed, decided face, the face that was her own. "Go back a ways," she said. "Far enough." He backed Walker further, to a low rise at the edge of the flat, where he tied both horses to a scrub cedar and sat on a rock with his hat in his lap. He could see her clearly from here, a dark figure in the open ground, standing still, head up, watching the sky the way she'd stood 2 nights ago before everything went wrong. The dark came down. The stars came out. The moon rose, the same 3/4 moon, painting the flat ground silver and casting Emma's shadow long and thin behind her. For the first hour, nothing happened. Emma stood. Cole watched. The night insects started up and then, after a while, went quiet. Then Emma went to her knees. Cole sat forward on the rock, his whole body tight, his hand moving to his gun and then pulling away. She'd told him not to come. Ahanu had told him not to come. Whatever happened, whatever he saw or heard, he had to stay back. Interference, a voice, a presence, anything could break what she was doing, could tip the balance the wrong way. He sat on the rock and he watched. Emma was bent forward now, hands on the ground, and even at this distance he could see the shaking, the same impossible tremor he'd seen in her hands at the kitchen table, but consuming her whole body now. She made no sound that carried to him. The night was perfectly silent except for the distant complaint of a coyote far to the west. The change began. He could see it starting the same way it had started 2 nights ago, the broadening, the growth, the silhouette altering, but then it stopped. It stopped and seemed to reverse, and Emma was fighting it in a way he could see, even from 50 yards, could see in the angle of her body and the rigidity of her arms braced against the ground, and he had never in his life wanted to go to her the way he wanted to in that moment. And he sat on the rock. The change tried again. The silhouette pushed outward, the shape nearly wrong, nearly the other thing, and then Emma made a sound that reached him across the flat ground, not a scream, something deeper than that. Something fundamental, the sound of a person refusing, and the shape collapsed back. Back and forth, 15 minutes, 20. Cole counted his breathing the way he counted it on long shots, 10 yards, 15, 20, because it was the only way he knew to hold still. to let a thing resolve at its own pace without his interference ruining it. At 40 minutes, Emma was lying on the ground. He came off the rock. He stopped himself. He sat back down. At 50 minutes, she hadn't moved. He was on his feet, walking, before the thought to walk was fully formed. Ahanu had said, "Don't go to her." Ahanu had said, "Wait until she comes back to you." But Ahanu hadn't been sitting on a rock watching his daughter lie motionless on the cold ground for 10 minutes. He stopped at 30 feet from her. She was lying on her side, curled slightly, completely still. The moonlight was flat and clear on her face. He could see her face, and he could not tell his whole life he'd been reading situations, reading ground, reading the signs that told you what was there, and what had happened, and what was going to happen. And he could not tell. Then her hand moved. Just her hand, the fingers spreading against the dirt, and then curling, gripping. He was at her side. He was on his knees beside her. He'd put his hand on her shoulder before the rule came back to him, and then he didn't care about the rule. Emma. Her eyes opened, gray-green, clear, her own eyes. She looked at him and then at the sky and then at him again. "Is it gone?" she said. Her voice was almost nothing, barely a thread of sound. He put his hand against her face. "Tell me what you feel." She was quiet for a moment, just breathing, just feeling whatever she was feeling. "It's quiet," she said. "It was so loud and now it's just..." She closed her eyes. "It's quiet." He sat there in the cold ground beside her, and he put his hat down somewhere, and he put his hand over hers, and he did not say anything because there was nothing to say. And they stayed that way for a long time under the wide sky, while the moon moved west, and the stars held their cold positions, and the flat ground lay still around them. She was sick for 3 days after. Not dangerously sick, exhausted, aching, feverish by turns, needing sleep the way the injured need sleep, a deep and serious kind of sleep that knits things back together. Dr. Hargrove came and checked on her and declared that she'd overworked herself, which Cole accepted with a straight face, and Hargrove prescribed rest and broth and quiet. Cole sat in the chair by her door at night and let himself sleep a little and woke at every sound. On the 4th day, she came downstairs for breakfast under her own power, moving carefully but upright, and she sat at the table and ate 2 biscuits and drank her coffee and looked at him with the shadows still under her eyes. But something else there too, something lighter than what had been there before, something that was the beginning of the absence of a weight she'd been carrying for months without him knowing. "The killings," she said. "They'll stop now?" "They should," he said. "Ahanu thinks the spirit will move on, find somewhere else." She nodded, looking at her cup. "The people who died, those families." "Yes," he said. "We can't." She stopped. "No," he said. "We can't." She nodded again, accepting this the way she accepted difficult things, not with happiness, not without pain, but with a kind of clear-eyed steadiness. It was a thing that had happened and could not be unhappened, and she would carry it the way you carry hard things, present with it, not pretending it was different than it was. Cole reported to Pruitt 2 days later that he'd tracked the creature to a canyon 20 miles north and found evidence that it had moved on, evidence he'd carefully manufactured with 2 hours of work in the hard pan. Pruitt looked at him with the eyes of a man who suspects he's not getting the whole story, but has the wisdom to understand that the whole story isn't always what a community needs. And he thanked Cole and paid him the bounty and shook his hand. There were no more killings. Autumn came to duskfall and then a long, mild winter, and Emma worked for Hargrove, and Cole took smaller contracts missing livestock, a property dispute with a man who'd jumped a neighboring ranch's water rights, the kind of quiet, ordinary work of a man who has decided, without quite deciding it, that he's done with the larger thing. He didn't talk to Emma about what had happened. She didn't ask him to. They'd passed through something together that didn't have a language yet, might never have one, and they understood each other anyway, in the way that people understand each other when they have seen the worst of a thing together and come out on the other side. One evening in late November, sitting on the porch in their coats with the cold prairie wind carrying the smell of distant snow, Emma said, "Are you going to stay? Here, I mean, in duskfall." "Thinking about it," Cole said. She was quiet a moment. "I'd like that," she said. "I know," he said. The wind moved through the dry grass beyond the fence. Walker stamped in the corral. The first stars of evening were coming out in the east, cold and precise, the same stars that had been above them that night on the flat ground north of town. Cole looked at them for a moment and then looked away. "Go inside," he said. "You'll catch cold." Emma stood, touched the back of his hand once briefly, the way she'd done since she was small, and went inside. Cole sat on the porch a while longer in the dark and the wind, and thought about all the contracts he'd taken in 30 years, all the things he'd tracked and found and brought back or ended, and the one night in all of them when he'd sat on a rock 50 yards away and held still, while the hardest thing he'd ever done resolved itself without him. He figured that was about right. He figured sometimes that was the whole of what a father did: hold still, stay close, and let the person they'd made find their own way through. He finished his coffee. He went inside. The door closed behind him, and the porch was empty, and duskfall was quiet. And out on the flat ground north of town, the wind moved through the dry grass, and there was nothing there at all but the stars and the cold and the wide dark country of the west, peaceful now, at rest. If this story moved you, we'd be grateful if you subscribe to the channel. It means everything to those of us who spend our nights in the Old West telling tales worth telling. Until next time, partner.